Today on Inspired, I'm really excited about the guest that we have. She has over 22 years of experience in the banking and finance sector. She has won many notable accolades. She has published articles, and she's very passionate about women empowerment. Okay, hello, Deborah. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to be chatting to you. So I have so many questions, and also I'm very much a fangirl because I've watched your career over the past couple of years. So I'm really, really happy that you're here with me today.
I need to tell my daughter I have fans.
Yeah, please do, and you have it on video now.
Absolutely. Evidence.
So the first question I'm going to start off with might be an interesting one for you is, have you always wanted to be a lawyer?
Sure. Okay. Tough question. I think the answer is no. I mean, interestingly, the first thing I started school very early. I grew up in Swaziland, actually, which is a fun fact for everyone who may or may not know me. But my dad is still there. My mom lives with my sister and I in Cape Town. But because I started my schooling career in Swaziland, I started quite early. So I finished school when I was 17. And I had absolutely no idea what I really wanted to do. So I actually spent my first year out of school doing computer programming. And I could not see myself in the sort of bowels of a building dealing with people's IT issues. And then I took what was, I guess, ostensibly a gap year doing nothing much. But I am also a person who likes predictability. And I think law was the career, or at least the study decision that was going to give me a defined career path. And that was probably the easiest one for me. And also at the time, and I didn't know what to do, and that's why I ended up doing computer programming, right? I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to go BCom, BA. BCom I probably would have really struggled with. My number skills are, not actuarial science level. And so when UCT introduced the 4-year undergraduate LLB, I jumped at the chance. And so... I think that was kind of a little bit of how I ended up here today.
Very interesting. And then if given the chance and you had a magic do-over, do you think you'd still make the same decisions you have?
Okay, again, oh my gosh, I've been at this for now 22 years and it's difficult to remember time now when I wasn't a lawyer. I'm 45, so it's pretty much half my life, right? It's probably as old as you are, 22. I think I was naive when I started, and I think everybody is naive when they start as to what being a lawyer actually is going to entail, and how tricky and how difficult and how political and how all of these other things that it's going to be. I mean, the law degree is one thing, and I think we all start out being lawyers because we want to make big world changes and do all of these great amazing things, and then end up being debt finance lawyers. So if I had a do-over, would I do it again? I'd have probably chosen something a little bit more creative. I love color. I love nail polish. I love art. So, perhaps that. But then again, I think given my own personality and my need for certainty and predictability, I probably wouldn't have managed as an artist. I think I'd have probably gotten slightly mad.
I can relate to that. I think since we've started on where this journey has began. Let's go back to your articles, right? And your associate days. Do you think that you did anything strategic back then to get you to where you are today?
Absolutely not. It was then a matter of survival. So another fun fact is I started my career out at Denes Rates. Denes Rates is where all legends were born and made. That firm no longer exists, but it was such an amazing firm at the time. I think it was one of those, it was the start of that sort of burgeoning big law firm culture where people had specialized expertise in a whole bunch of things. And, just because I was so unsighted as
Yep.
to what it meant to be a candidate attorney, I don't think I did anything. It was just a case of trying to survive.
Right.
And I think I was, if I look back at some of the choices that I made, some of them were pretty dumb.
Mm-hmm.
But, you kind of, I think at that point in your career, you really are just trying to get to the next 6 months or the next level. I mean,
Yeah.
at Danae's rates, we rotated between departments every 6 months. So it was
Okay.
like 6 months of intense, have a break, 6 months of intense, have a break, and, hope for
Right.
the best, because different people have different styles. It was, it was a very different thing being in litigation to being in the corporate department. And, yeah, I mean, it was, at that point, and I think it's the same for young lawyers today, is like, how do I survive this and do my best at the same time?
Yes.
And then you figure it out from there. And I think a lot of it, I mean, so for example, I'm at ENS now.
Mm-hmm.
The candidate attorneys don't necessarily move through departments. So at ENS, you are placed in a team, and that is
Okay.
where you stay for your 2 years.
That's interesting.
It is. I mean, I think there are various debates both ways. But what at least Danae's rates allowed me to do was try and figure out where I was a better lawyer.
Yes.
And that was important for me.
Okay.
Some people do know exactly, where they want to go and what they want to do. And because I had absolutely no frame of reference, I'm not from a family of lawyers. You kind of you've got to test the water in a whole bunch of ways before you ultimately land where you do.
Right.
So,
Okay. That actually leads me to my next question, which is, how did you know banking and finance was the right decision for you?
well, I didn't. I think I just took the opportunities that were given to me at the time.
Right.
And so Danae's rates, I had sort of rotated through a number of departments. I really loved my boss in litigation. I mean, he was fantastic. And then I can't even remember where I started, but it was because the Cape Town office was, slightly smaller than the Johannesburg office at the time. We had a smaller corporate department. And so I was in corporate. And then one of these, actually, he happens to be my co-partner at ENS today. His name is Clinton. He was working in the Johannesburg office of Danae's rates. And we were he'd won a deal for Absa Bank.
Oh.
And at the time, Absa Bank was going to acquire the book, the Woolworths Financial Services book, because Woolworths Financial Services at the time was pretty small, not small, but big enough, but not the Woolworths Financial Services that you know today, where you can swipe your card and do all of these wonderful things. And because Woolworths was headquartered in Cape Town, we needed to do the due diligence in Cape Town, and I was doing the due diligence.
Right.
And I was like, actually, this financial services stuff is quite cool,
Yeah.
And also Clinton was a young lawyer, and I thought, actually, how cool to be in a department where there are sort of slightly younger people. I didn't need to be old and stale. No disrespect to any of the M&A lawyers out there, to do cool work. And then Clinton was, going off to, ironically, Ellen and Overy in Japan. Looks like I've kind of followed his career trajectory, which I haven't. But anyhow, he went off to Ellen and Overy in Japan, and they needed somebody with historical knowledge on the deal to at least help get the deal to completion. And they said to me, do I want to go off to Joburg? But it would mean being in the banking team.
Right.
And that's what I did. And that's kind of how I ended up in there, and happily so. I think, it was at the time, which is, again, as I say, 22 years ago, there were a bunch of awesome professionals in the Danae's rates crew. We were, I think, doing market leading work at the time. The lawyers, as I say, were a lot younger than the M&A corporate guys. And so that's where I probably felt most at home. And then I think the work was also quite interesting. We would, and it changes all the time. So banking and finance or debt finance is a sort of quite a broad discipline,
Yeah.
and in that is, banking and non-banking financial services. There's some regulatory stuff when people are coming to market, wanting to do investments into South Africa, and so you were seeing like interesting stuff. It wasn't, and that's not to say other disciplines are not interesting, but we were seeing some of the sort of market. First to market products. We were seeing some of the first to market, big loans. We were doing derivatives. So it was a little bit. It was good for me because I don't have a long attention span, and so I was able to do all sorts of other, all sorts of varied things in a work environment.
Interesting. To go back to what you mentioned, which was at ENS currently, there's no real rotation. So do the candidate attorneys get to kind of choose which department they go into, or how is that working?
So they do have, so I understand when they are recruited, they do have various options for preference.
Okay.
And so part of the recruitment process is to do various psychometric tests, et cetera. And so through those processes and procedures, people can see, this clever HR people can see where people are best suited.
Okay.
And so they will try very hard to put people in the departments that they want to go into. I mean, that's not to say if you didn't vocalize that you couldn't work with another department, and then some people who found that they absolutely don't love something will try to rotate out if there's space and all of those sorts of things. But those things are pretty much driven by, the requirements of the business, etc.
Okay, that's very interesting. I didn't know that, so thank you. And then now is typically the time when a lot of CAs are starting. And really nervous because I remember my first week I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Can I speak? Should I speak? Or should I just keep quiet?
You should always speak. Yeah.
So do you have any advice for anybody that's just either starting in a new job or in their first year of articles? Any advice for them that you think might be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, law firms are pretty daunting, intimidating places for somebody who's new. And there are all of these sort of hard-nosed people doing actually really important work. And the work that we do is important and really, fundamental at its heart. It's, what makes sort of commerce go around, really. And I think that's something that young attorneys coming in need to understand, is that this isn't sort of Lego building.
Yeah.
The work that we do has an impact on people's livelihoods, if you're in employment, for example, on people's contracts or whatever it may be. And I think going in with a mindset that this, even if we're not necessarily working at The Hague, we are still doing work that fundamentally impacts humans.
Right.
And that's important. But I think it is also important to just go in with a mindset of taking every single opportunity that you can, asking questions, but not taking up people's time with questions that don't go anywhere.
Okay.
And that's not to say, there's not an open door policy, but it's very important to be useful, to know your craft, and knowing your craft at candidate attorney level means just actually being useful. And that means, so for example, in my space is, if we're doing a transaction, your job is to understand exactly where every document is, what each document says, and that's the learning that starts. I'm not going to ask you to draft the document. I need you to start learning by osmosis. Okay, so this is how the transaction hangs together. Do a little bit of groundwork before you start taking up people's time in their offices, etc. My old HOD used to say to me, when you're a young attorney, use the empty chair test for yourself. And that is, in the sort of throes of battle, when the chips are down and you're needing to close a deal or whatever, does your partner want to see you in that chair, or does he absolutely want that chair to be empty?
Interesting.
And so, I mean, obviously you want to be in the chair,
Right.
because you need to be the person that knows where this document is, what that document says, how it all, it's that kind of stuff at the moment. And as basic as it sounds,
Yep.
it's actually fundamental to any transaction, to any deal, to any case. I mean, you were a litigator in your previous life, knowing where the documents were,
Right.
what was paginated, who paginated. Well, I don't know. I'm probably giving a really poor example in the context of a litigation, but it's important to know, like, the matrix of your
Right.
deal, and that's just like document management at inception. Project management is another skill. So it's those kinds of like odd things that you never think you're going to be doing as a first year, but it's the project management that is fundamentally important. So are you going to be useful and be able to help me execute and manage my project?
Don't just come in and try to do
Take
the big
over
stuff.
the world.
Yeah.
And also, like, there is, especially for example in banking and finance, there is value in predictability in our sort of commoditized world, for example, of a loan market. You don't need to start reinventing what people with really great minds have done for years. There's a way that the market moves. There's the way that the market kind of expects things to be done. You absolutely do not want to be the spanner in that work, and you don't want to be the lawyer that people say, oh my goodness, we should never use him because we're going to have to add XYZ to our fee because he's so unpredictable. So know your craft, and in knowing your craft means knowing when you can be inventive and when you also have to stay the course.
Okay. I think that's very interesting, and I think a lot of people probably would want to listen to that and be like, okay, this is what I need to do.
Yes, my advice always, and one of my star associates, her name is Monet van der Walt.
Ooh. Shout out.
Shout out to Monet. My first bit of advice to her was, do not reinvent the wheel.
Okay.
I need to know that my documents always look this same way, so that when somebody asks me or a client asks me where X is, I know that I can go to that document and it's going to be there. I don't want somebody to have exercised their discretion and taken it out and suddenly it's not there and XYZ doesn't work.
Right.
So yeah.
Very interesting. We spoke about this a bit earlier, where we kind of touched on sometimes a move in your career is very important. Do you want to kind of just highlight how you've learned that?
Yeah, so I have moved, now I'd moved twice in my career before I moved back to ENS. I started at Denes Rates, as I said earlier on. Yeah. Clinton, who's my current partner or my co-partner in the team at ENS, was coming back from Allen & Overy in Japan, and I was still living in Joburg because I'd gone to finish that ABSA deal that we had talked about. And I'd loved Joburg, and it was actually it was a good learning for me just in the context of banking and finance. There were some amazing lawyers there. But my life was here. I mean, when I say my life was here, I'd finished university here, and I preferred living in Cape Town. And he was coming back, but coming to Cape Town, and then asked me to move back to Cape Town to join the team, which I did. I was quite young in my career then. I'd just been made a partner at Denes Rates. And so I think that was an interesting move, but it wasn't a move that had any fundamental shift in who I was, I think, because I was going back to some sort of level of familiarity. I'd been at ENS then for 13 years, and I was like, okay, I needed a change for all sorts of reasons. Probably a lot of them were personal. And I thought, well, what do I want to do that's different?
Right.
And then I moved to Allen & Overy before it became A.O. Sherman. And that was probably the most fundamental move in my career. It was really interesting to me to see, and I moved to A&O as a partner. And it was just so interesting to me to see the difference between how domestic law firms ran versus global law firms and how they operated the business of law, which I wasn't entirely privy to at ENS at the time. The A&O office in South Africa was quite small, and so all of the partners were really involved in a lot of the parts of the business that you wouldn't normally be involved in. And also then to see how business was being run at a global level, and that was just tremendous. I mean, it was also probably the most trying chapter in my career. It was really, really tricky to move from a domestic law firm onto an international one. The kinds of expectations they had of clients and how to manage, matters, how to manage profitability, it was just, I mean, everything was so fundamentally different. But it was probably the most growth I'd had in my career over the past 2 years. I mean, I got to do some pretty cool stuff. I got to travel. I got to speak at places like the Berlin Global Dialogue. Those were and that was part of the sort of, I guess, the glamour, and it's not glamorous actually, of being in an international law firm, because at its heart it was actually it was a demanding and taxing place. But it was super, because I've come back with a whole bunch of new ideas. When I say also new ideas, new energy, different perspective. And I think that makes me not only a better corporate citizen at ENS now, but allows me to influence, if they take my influence, I guess, but allows me to contribute in ways that are different and not only related to my practice.
It's interesting that you said it was one of the most trying times of your career. When you step into a situation that feels very challenging, I'm not sure how you feel. I typically have a lot of imposter syndrome, and I'm like, should I be here? How do you deal with those types of difficult thoughts and difficulties that happen?
Keep walking. I don't know. It's like you've just got to keep putting one step in front of the other, or one foot in front of the other, because I think that's just the other reality. And I think it was a soundbite from Barack Obama, actually, who I think is fabulous. And he was saying, you end up sitting around the table with these people that are placed in these amazing, not placed, but have earned places in these amazing either organizations or presidents or whatever it is. And he was like, when at their heart, they're just people. And he was like, and you kind of like, that guy was slightly whack. So you kind of just learn to navigate those things. But I've never had imposter syndrome. I don't think. I just think, like, actually, why wouldn't anyone want to get to know me?
I love that.
So you've got to keep, you've got to keep going. And actually, I think I come at it, I guess, from a point of view as a woman of color and diversity. It's like, why wouldn't anyone want to have diversity at the table? Why wouldn't anyone? And perhaps I didn't speak, and I think perhaps what I didn't do was speak out enough. And I think, especially in in my first year or whatever it is, I was very much a listener. I was like trying to figure this whole thing out. So that's probably how I deal with it, is not to vocalize too much. Right. But I think that also rattles people, because people will be like, you've obviously got a lot going on in your head. Why didn't you talk about it? I'm like, no, I'm just trying to understand exactly what's going on. But I think the point is just, small steps, one in front of the other, and understand the value that you, just by being you ultimately bring to a table. Otherwise they wouldn't have hired you.
That's very true. I think that's very interesting. It's sometimes it's common knowledge, but sometimes it's just nice to hear from someone that's been around the block. Like, what do you do in those situations? You touched on being a woman of color, right? There's a lot of chats about this recently, where people say that there isn't so many kind of issues where it's relating to race and gender, especially in the legal fraternity. What are your thoughts on this?
Shoo, loaded question. So let's start with gender. I mean, I think from a gendered perspective, it's what is interesting, especially in law, is, and if you look at, even if you start even earlier at university level, classes are about 60-40 female to male. And by the time you get to where I'm sitting, and I'm not at the top of my game at all, or the top of a game in any organization, the ratio of females to males is absolutely inverted. And I think some of that has to do with biology, and I mean it in no disrespectful way to anyone. I think some women who want to have children, priorities absolutely change. They don't need this, they don't want this, and it becomes really difficult to have, you're wearing so many jobs throughout the day, and your job as a mother, frankly, for most people, including me, is my most important job. And I think if you looked at my LinkedIn profile now, I think it says mom and then lawyer. Exactly. And I only have one child, but there are people who have multiple children, and that is challenging in a South Africa where, you've just got to juggle a whole bunch of things on a daily basis. And so I think those open inverted commas traditional roles of the woman being the homemaker still frankly exist. Okay, so that's on the gender part. I think on the people of color part, oh my gosh, it is tricky. I mean, it's tricky. There's not a lot of representation at senior level for women of color specifically, and that's also why I don't leave. I was like, you're gonna have to sweep me out of here, because it's important for people to see that there are people like me who exist in not, in fairly senior roles within an organization. And there are people like me whose voice is going to be influential in relation to whatever it may be. Across big law firms, there's a handful of us. I mean, you can pick us out and put us all in a room, and we probably wouldn't get to 20, which is a sad indictment on all you males. I'm joking, kind of not really, but it's a lot of things. It's not just one thing. It's and people kind of just end up taking different roles, and I think part of it is financial. To be perfectly frank, I think for people of color, there is no generational wealth. And so when somebody is offering you to go in-house at a significantly increased salary, and you can't play the long game that is required of you in a law firm, and it is a long game. I mean, it is just a long game, and there's no two ways around it. It's fundamentally a case of survival, bread and butter. So yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, but it's all of those things, and I think those are all of the things that we have to understand about where we find ourselves as South Africans. Really, I don't know if I've really even answered your question, but
I think you have. There's so many different factors, like you've said, that kind of impact it. I think also you touched on earlier, I'm not sure if we've had this on tape, where you said that you don't come from a family of lawyers, right? Neither do I. A lot of my family actually weren't even in the corporate kind of professional space. So when I came into a corporate space, I was like, what am I supposed to do? Is there a hack? How am I going to climb the corporate ladder? And we also talked about this earlier, where a lot of younger people like myself, we want to kind of climb the ladder almost too quickly. What are your thoughts on this? Is there a strategy that exists? Is it just hard work? What is the secret, if any?
I mean, it's a tough question. I mean, I think what you said right now is so true. Is there is no quick way to doing this job, and you can be the smartest young person in the room. The fact of the matter is, people are always going to defer to experience. And so in this particular profession, the only thing you can do is persevere. And perseverance is frankly your hack. It's like, you're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Human error is just going to be there. So, I think making sure that your job isn't your own identity, so that when people are giving you some hard feedback, it doesn't crush you as a, let your job be a reflection of who you are or what your ultimate purpose is, but the job mustn't be the purpose. The job must be the goal to get you ultimately your purpose, right? Purpose can't be achieved. And I think your purpose evolves over time. My purpose when I started was survival. My purpose in my 20s was, okay, let's try and be better at X. And and my goals were to win that kind of job, do this, do that. My purpose now is to make sure that I put bread on the table for my family and that my daughter has every single opportunity that she wants. And so what does that mean? My goal was to move to A&O to make sure I was compensated in a way that I thought was fair, get some real international experience. So some of those goals change and are changed by outside factors. For example, A&O closed down. But what is my goal now at ENS? Still to put bread on the table for my daughter, but do it in a way that gives me other ways of fulfillment. Do I carve out a different role for myself at ENS? So I think your purpose is really your origin story, really, and that never really changes. I've always been a carer, a nurturer, this or that. Sometimes your purpose is self-preservation. And I think your purpose as a lawyer, your purpose is never the lawyering. Your purpose is all of the other things, and your goals must be how you achieve that purpose in the profession that you're pursuing.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful.
Trying to drop all the knowledge bombs here. I'm joking.
It's very deep. I think it's going to be very helpful for a lot of juniors to hear that, because, like you said, there's no hack.
There's no hack. Oh, there's no hack. I mean, I think, so I'm sorry. What I think perhaps where I've been different is I've actually been fairly, I think, intentional about my own choices in my career. I'm never going to have that determined for me. So I was very intentional. I think there was an opportunity for me, but I thought to myself, there's more value that I can add to a firm that knows me and knows that I'm trying to contribute in different ways, rather than going into something that was entirely new, where people didn't sort of have me on their radars or know me from a bar of soap. So I think it's important to plot and plan what your goals are.
Right.
Like, are your goals international exposure? Are your goals financial? Are your goals whatever? And then figure out from there what your strategy is. But one of the consistent goals must be, I have to persevere through this thing if I want to make it. If I want a career of longevity in law.
Interesting. Another thing that I've kind of noticed recently in some firms is people are being promoted quite quickly. And we spoke about partnership a little earlier. And you said you had very interesting thoughts of what a partner actually is. There's probably going to be a few senior associates listening and maybe also contemplating, they want to move on to the next step. What do you think they need to be thinking about before they get to that step?
Yeah, so, it was at A&O, as I said to you again. I mean, I think I said earlier on, it was there that I really understood what partnership meant and how partners needed to behave and be and do. And this goes to my point again, you can be the smartest person in the room and your financial performance might be knocking things out of the park. But being a partner is being a wholesome individual in a law firm. And that means, are you going to not only grow the financial pie, but are you going to grow the pie in a way that is meaningful for the firm? And that means, are you going to act with integrity? Are you going to be a good person? Are you going to acknowledge people's value wherever they are in the organization? Are you going to treat people in a way that allows them to grow? Or are you just going to be a megalomaniac? And if you're going to be a megalomaniac, regardless of financial performance, my view is that person is absolutely not a partner, not partnership material for me. I can't call that person my partner when I know how diabolical they are. And also, obviously, the other things that you need are sort of good practice management skills and all of those
Right.
other things, and know your business. But I think there's always an emphasis on financial performance and all of those things, but it's the what people call soft skills that really make or break how a person ultimately continues to progress through this organization, any organization. The soft skills are fundamental, and partnership isn't just one thing. And so, I mean, I think it takes a whole person to be a partner.
Right.
And as I keep saying to every single person who's ever under my watch at a firm, people will never forget how you make them feel. You can be the smartest lawyer in the room. If you are a ass, you're an ass, and people don't want to work with you. They'll learn certain things from you, like, oh, okay, we'll go and do X here. So don't be an ass.
Right.
And that's and that, as a partner, don't be an ass. And then obviously, those, your network, your clients, all of those sorts of things. People, your reputation starts to precede you when you are an ass. So you don't want that as you don't want that kind of person as a partner. I want to be able to be very confident in calling people my partners and saying, hey, come and see this guy, and know that he's not going to be a total misogynist or treat people poorly or have some ridiculous out there view or whatever it might be. So I think it's really important, and it's also really important to understand what partnership actually really means. And at its core, it's how do we grow this business for the benefit of the partnership? And that's all of those things that, ultimately, resonate with me.
That's very, very, very interesting. I'm sure a lot of people are maybe going to comment on that one, I think.
I know.
You've obviously been in the industry for a while. You've watched it evolve. What do you think currently is kind of the biggest hurdles that the legal fraternity needs to kind of jump over or work on?
Well, I mean, this is also just where, for example, the difference between, and I'm not speaking for all domestic law firms.
Right.
I mean, I think where, for example, international law firms have really started to embrace things like AI, and AI in law is going to fundamentally change how efficiently we practice, how quickly we can get things done, how accurately we can get things done. And that is something that I think, we need as South African lawyers more broadly to embrace. I think there are evolutions, and we cannot be left behind when the market is moving a particular way. I mean, again, at my old law firm, we had some amazing AI functionality where it was always like a good first pass where you could dump a whole bunch of documents in. Hey, check this for me. Let's, ask, obviously make sure that your prompts were decent, but it gave you a good basis, which, in the ordinary course, if you had to read 150 documents, you'd have to rely on a whole heap of people, their interpretation of it. And yes, you're relying on the AI tool, but you are getting a first pass at what is in there, how it all works. You can then instruct your team better, or not better, but you can instruct your team efficiently. Hey, let's look for this. This is what this threw up, etc., etc. And also for things like due diligence, I mean, the accuracy of those tools is just unsurpassed. Things like in litigators' world, not finding new case law because AI has been known to create cases, but dumping into the AI tool what the judgment looks like and say, hey, what is the ratio here, or were there alternative views? What were those alternative views? And kind of, those important things. And at least you get you can start to develop things from there. And those things happen in lightning quick time. Gone are the days when you're going to ask a candidate attorney to spend 3 days doing a due diligence, when frankly it can be done in, at least you can get a sort of red flag initial due diligence within a day or two.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the most fundamental shift I think that we're probably seeing at the moment. But the utility of those tools is, it can't be understated, especially in our world. It doesn't make us redundant, because you still have to do all of those checks, you still have to do all of those, but you know, all of the other things. You're the one taking the consultation with the client. You're the one still having to, you know, input whatever it is or understand. You know, AI doesn't understand nuance. It doesn't understand all of the other sort of humanoid factors that go into something. But it absolutely does make our jobs more efficient, and it absolutely does make our jobs a little bit more accurate, like initially accurate, if I could put it that way.
I think that's a very interesting one. I think a lot of people were scared that it's going to eventually result in maybe less CAs being appointed because you have Harvey or whatever AI tool you're using. I remember someone said, like, usually a CA takes about a day to draft a document, whereas Harvey could do it within an hour. Do you think that it actually would result in not hiring so many CAs? Or
well, look, I mean, I think, and it's I think this is I think so in the London market, maybe, for example.
Okay.
In the South African market, it's an imperative to kind of get people through. We're already oversubscribed in terms of law students that are coming out of. So I think where you already hire too many CAs for your particular organizational needs, that might happen. So you can pare that down. But I think maybe, you know, like most people are hiring CAs because they want to see them grow through the ranks. And so I think the intention, at least with CAs or CA hiring practices, is always to hire people that you see working in your organization. So I don't necessarily think that that's going to, I don't think that will happen.
Okay.
And I think as South Africans, we know what our social imperatives are, right? We can't just sort of disavow, you know, people's ability to sort of obtain jobs, job security, because we've got some fabulous AI tool. And I think it also does different things. You're still going to need continuity in your organization. At least a big law firm is going to need continuity. So, you know, I don't think so.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. Since you touched on hiring, right? You're often on the other side where you are looking at a CA or an associate or senior associate. I think a lot of people would love to actually hear this. When someone is interviewing with you, what are the things that you're looking for?
You know, I've taken a slightly different view than some of my other colleagues. I think people who've passed a law degree, who've gone through an articles, who've gone through whatever, you have to assume a certain level of competence. And so for me, I want to see, are you going to be able to work in a team? Are you going to understand team dynamics? Must the team revolve around you? Do you understand diversity? Those are the things for me that ultimately, so again, I've had disagreements with people. I always think you can teach somebody to be a better lawyer, but you cannot teach them to be a decent human when those fundamentals are missing. And so I'd rather work with a decent human that needs training than the other way around. And so what I look for are decent people.
I think you might be a very handful of people are thinking like you, but that's nice to hear.
I know there are not. I've had very many who don't necessarily agree with me, but I always just think you can teach. You know, it's we're not building rockets, and if you can read and write and have an analytical brain, which you've got because you've managed to get your law degree, right? You've written your exams, you've done fairly well. I'm not necessarily going to hire you if your marks are only 50s, but if there's a variation and you can see that there's some things that you enjoy, some things that you didn't, I'm open to having that discussion. I was that student, and I think that's probably why I'm slightly less fixated on a mark than sort of the ability to show that you can, you know, do exactly right and do sort of sort of execute things logically, right? And so
you said that you weren't an A student. I think that's very motivational. If I look back at myself, I think maybe my marks was something that held me back from looking at different fields in law. So I think it's very inspiring, actually, for a lot of people that might be in the same boat to see, look at all of the amazing things you've accomplished.
So, look, my law degree was done now 25 years ago, whatever it was. And I do think that the way we were tested was slightly different, and the aggregate of the marks was not A's then either.
Right.
So when you sit on a recruitment committee now, it's very, there's people that are like shooting the lights out. And
Yeah.
how people, I mean, there was maybe two guys, Jan van Zyl, I remember his name, and his father was a university lecturer, and he was super smart, and he was never getting 90s. Now you see some sort of transcripts where that is, that is common, and I'm not sure that should ever be common in a law degree. I don't know. I don't understand the marking metrics, but it wasn't. I wasn't. Absolutely wasn't. But it also was at a time when, getting a first class pass was also not common.
Right.
I was on the Dean's Merit List. I wasn't totally off the off the wall, but it was I think it was at a time of very different metrics. And that's why I think, again, I kind of look at it and I think to myself, well, okay, there's somebody getting 90. You've kind of got to look at, it's kind of often the sort of, I don't know, average students who are willing to persevere a little bit more through the law firm process, to be honest. I think a lot of the really smart kids sometimes struggle through it, because it's a very different, the metrics are very different. So yeah, I don't know, that was a long-winded answer.
I think also for me, what would be interesting is to kind of just hear from you. You've touched on this. I think you've been very open about the legacy you're trying to build, but the next 5 years, 10 years, what do you think? What is a long-lasting legacy of Deborah Carmichael?
Take over the world. I don't know. I think I would like to be remembered as somebody who treated people fairly, regardless of where you were at in the open inverted commas hierarchy of a law firm. And I think that is something that I am absolutely intentional about. And it's especially important, as you say, for people of color who are already coming into something that is entirely different. There aren't many points of sort of familiarity or context. And so really it is fairness and calling out poor behavior. I do it all the time. It's not easy, but I'm vocal about it, and I'm vocal about it because it's not nice to be on the receiving end of it, and that behavior then tends to get rewarded because that person is a good financial performer or whatever. Right. I am not about that life. Never have been.
In the banking and finance industry, what do you think is going to be some of the challenges that come up in the next couple of years?
Good question. I mean, I think that answer is different depending on where you sit in the world, right? I mean, from an African perspective, geopolitics is interesting, and what that means for investment into South Africa is going to be interesting under a Donald Trump / Elon Musk regime. Some of the regulatory challenges, we've gone from a robust but fairly sort of not unregulated but regulated well enough financial services regime to a place that is now quite regulated with this Twin Peaks Financial Sector Regulation Act. It's an interesting sort of place to operate in South African financial services at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I think probably two of those things, and then governance and ESG are probably still going to continue. And ESG, for those who don't know, is environmental, social governance issues. Those are probably going to continue to be drivers of investment. And I think those are challenges that as South African lawyers, as African lawyers, we really need to grapple with.
Right.
How do we implement, deals in an international best practice way, but that are relevant to our own jurisdictions? Importing those kinds of importing principles and things from foreign jurisdictions doesn't always work here. But I think it's that, and obviously making sure that we continue to be attractive for foreign investment. But I think, placing more emphasis on the African continent rather than looking further afield, I think, those are some of the benefits and advantages that we have. Africa is ripe for growth, so I think, there's still going to be good opportunities there. But I think geopolitically, it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out. And that is, we've got 4 years on the horizon for that.
Okay, so we also chatted about other law firms and that kind of thing. I feel like you have the mic now. Is there anything that you think that law firms and law firm culture can work on?
Ooh.
Let's
law
hope that they
firm
take
culture.
notes.
Sure. Interestingly, shout out to Bowman's. And everyone knows that sort of there was a move from the A&O crew to Bowman's.
Right.
One of the things that they talked very passionately about was their culture. And no matter who you spoke to at Bowman's, people were really protective of this culture that they have. I mean, obviously, I'm not there and I don't know quite what that means, but they seem to have this great culture. And I think it's so important to be... I mean, they've obviously gone about it pretty intentionally and built around whatever principles that culture is. And I think it's important to define what that culture is and then live that culture. I think people kind of erode, sometimes law firm values for own gain.
Right.
And that, as I say, I mean, shout out to Bowman's and all of the people who are doing the great things there, but there seems to be a culture that works. And, I think to improve law firm culture, I think we must live out those cultural values, but we need to define what those cultural values are, get people's buy-in, and then make sure that is a lived culture and not papered over for financial reward and gain. I don't know. That was, and then there was another part of your question that I've forgotten now. But what can I do to improve?
What can we do to improve the law firm culture?
Culture, was it just culture? Okay, yeah. So that I think that is what I would say is, in addition to making sure that, it's obviously a business, but in addition to making sure that there is proper financial reward for, I guess, great work, that we need to set values and live out those values.
Another thing is a lot of juniors want more work-life balance, but at the same time want to climb the corporate ladder. Is that a realistic thing?
No.
Can you have it all?
No. You can have it all at different times, but you can't have it all together. And I think the reality of being in a law firm is when you are climbing that corporate ladder, your work-life balance is going to be a little bit out of kilter. Right. And there's never a perfect moment where you are going to work at 9, knocking off at 5, and then having a full weekend all the time necessarily. I think the older you get, the easier it becomes to define what that means for you, and then depending on what who your clients are, and clients also have children, clients also have lives, so they understand that they too want to work-life balance. And so having that kind of dialogue with the people who are your main instructors or whatever does help. But when you are climbing, unfortunately, it is not easy, and it's something that you're going to have to it's something that you are going to have to sacrifice. It doesn't mean that people need to be mean and nasty and tell you to work over weekends just for the sake of doing so. There are going to be free weekends. You are going to be able to go to your brother's wedding. You've also just got to have those, and that's where, when you said advice, I mean, ask questions, open communication with the people that you're working with is saying, hey, I've got this really important thing. I've also got this really important matter. Is there somebody who can cover for me? You don't have to die at the stake. It's not like, as I said, we're not like bringing people back from sort of Mars. Usually these things are manageable. And so, work-life balance is important, and it's important, and that's why it's also important to have a well-rounded person who knows when they are, when they need to take a break, when they need to do whatever. And in some cases where you've got a manager who's also managing their own practice well and managing their clients well, it's pretty easy for an associate or a clerk to have work-life balance, right? Because that trickles down.
Right.
It often starts with a poor manager when that sort of work-life balance is a bit distorted, but it will be a bit distorted in some instances. So actually, maybe my answer was not no, such a vocal no. It's a no and yes, depending on how lucky you are and where you land, but also, it's not binary. You're not never going to have a work-life balance.
I think at where you currently are now, you've spoken obviously about management, and that is essentially one of the big parts of having work-life balance, is how you're managing your time and resources and all of that. So would you say that you are currently in a space where you are having the perfect balance or good enough balance?
A good enough balance. I've obviously just recently again transitioned into ENS. So for me, my work-life balance is going to be distorted towards work. It helps that my child is at school and has a very sort of healthy school life. I obviously do have a partner, and so he probably suffers the most from like my distorted work environment. Right. But for the next couple of months, I know that my work-life balance is not going to be what I want it to be, because I've got to put in extra hours too. I've got to put in extra hours. I've got to understand the systems. I've got to understand the deals that are there, where I need to step in, where I don't. And that means extra hours for me. So no, I don't have a good work-life balance at the moment, but it is also self-imposed. So I don't know. Weird answer again.
No, I think that's a perfect answer. I think it's also really helpful for people to know that you have to work hard. There's going to come, like you said, there's different seasons for everything. And this is currently your season where you have to just put in a little extra, but eventually it'll come back where you have your balance again.
Yep.
On that note, what are some of the things that you are looking forward to this year?
Sure. Well, my daughter's turning 13 on the 1st of February, so that is a big moment for Nicholas and I. Sure. Flip having a teenager in the house. Am I looking forward to it? Yeah, she's been a interesting little character to have around. She does keep us young and youthful and all of those things, and in touch with youth culture, which is a huge thing, like skibbity toilet and all of these like weird sayings that she has, and I'm so Sigma. So you kind of so there's that, and I'm really looking forward to some of the work actually that is in the team at the moment. Clinton has always had this really interesting practice, and so being able to do some of that cool stuff, and there's some really interesting, cool stuff happening in the banking space. And if one of the deals that we've got on the table comes off, I think it would be fundamentally sort of market shifting in the South African banking space. It's interesting. So there's some cool stuff happening there, and I'm quite interested to see how my own growth works at ENS, given the clients that I grew with at A&O, whether I can, transport them back to ENS. Challenges, but growth. Those kinds of things.
It's going to be very exciting. I'll be watching.
Don't watch too hard.
Any lasting or long-lasting words you want to leave with any of the viewers?
Wow. Just be Sigma. I'm, I'm joking. Look, I mean, I think it's really important to persevere through this profession.
Right.
It's also really important, and it's to our earlier conversation, is understand what your purpose in that season is and set goals to achieve them. You never achieve your purpose. So try and set goals that allow you to achieve that. And if that purpose isn't being in a law firm, if the goal isn't being in a law firm, there are so many different career paths that you can take as a qualified lawyer. So, persevere, but understand what it is you need, define what your purpose is, and set goals to achieve them.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I think it's been really lovely to hear a bit about your story. You've been so open and honest, and I think not just myself, but I think a lot of people that are watching are going to really appreciate that.